This is Charlotte Talks. I'm Mike Collins. Last week, 2 African Americans were shot and killed at a Kroger in Kentucky after the shooter failed to gain entrance to a predominantly African American church, presumably with the intent of using his weapons on those inside. This past Saturday, a synagogue in Pittsburgh was the scene of a mass shooting. 11 people there to worship were murdered by a man espousing anti-Semitic views. Anger and hatred in the United States is on the rise, and along with it, carnage. We're going to talk about how the faith community deals with such attacks. But first, we look at yet another tragedy involving a gun, this one closer to home. Yesterday morning, about 26 hours ago, a student was shot and killed in the halls of Butler High School. Matthews police confirms that the shooter was another student who was quickly taken into custody. It was described as an isolated incident, a verbal and physical fight between 2 individuals which escalated. But the fact remains, one student chose to shoot another and had a gun on a CMS campus. And joining us now to fill us in on the latest details is WFAE's Jessa O'Connor. Welcome to the program.
Hello, Mike. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. We now know the identities of the victim and the shooter. The victim was a 16-year-old sophomore. The shooter was a 16-year-old ninth grader. The suspect has been charged now with first-degree murder. What else do we know about them?
So we do have their names. We know that the victim was identified as Bobby McKeithen, and the shooter was identified as Jaytwan Cuffey. Both of them were students at Butler, as you said, and both of them were 16 years old.
Yeah. CMS Superintendent Clayton Wilcox has said that this was related to bullying, but the Matthews Police Department's press conference yesterday, Matthews PD refused to answer who was bullying whom. I suppose it really doesn't matter in the end, but do we have any more information about that, or what argument led up to this tragedy?
As of this moment, we don't. We know that it started as a verbal altercation that escalated into a physical one. Superintendent Wilcox has said that out of fear, the student brought a gun into the equation, but as of specifics, we don't know, and police are being pretty tight-lipped.
Why?
They say it's because it's early stages of the investigation. They don't want to spread any rumors. They don't want to spread any misinformation, especially as kids are making things go viral on the internet, on social media.
And there was not only cell phone video, which there is now of everything, but there was surveillance video of this, and there were many witnesses to this, evidently, because it was 7:15 in the morning, and there were lots of kids in the hallway, and probably some faculty and other staff there as well. What we know of this incident, do we know it from those people? Do we know it from these videos? How do we know what we know?
So we only know it from the press conference, what CMS has told us, what police has told and not told us. We know the scene as students were exiting the building from Twitter videos. We know that it was chaotic. We know that there were some kids just yelling, "Get us out of here." We know that there were dozens of students, and Wilcox has confirmed this, dozens of students that saw this shooting occur. And one student said when her friend heard the gunshot, the friend pretty much just ran into the first open classroom that they saw. But as far as who was the bully, who was being bullied, we really don't know.
So we've talked about this on this program many times, and in the aftermath of the Parkland High School shooting in Florida last year, CMS spent millions of dollars on top of millions of dollars spent previously on upping security. How did this gun get into this school?
That's the question everybody's asking. And yesterday at the press conference, Wilcox said they really don't know, but CMS bears the responsibility of keeping schools safe. And this came at a time when CMS was already trying to really think about school security, and where the county had approved a 2-phase plan of $9 million for school security needs, and that money's been going to enhanced video equipment, that money's been going to perimeter fencing and upgraded locks, but it hasn't been going to metal detectors, it hasn't been going to student checkpoints, because Wilcox says that's our schools are too big for that.
It would take too long to go through the metal detectors in and out every single day.
And Butler had, 2,100 kids?
Right.
That's a lot of kids to check their backpacks
There's
every
an aerial
morning.
shot of Butler High School on one of the network newscasts last night, and it is enormous from the air. This has had, obviously, parents at Butler High School extremely upset, and parents throughout the system. One parent told WFAE News yesterday that, quote, CMS is really going to have to look at security. You don't want to miss patting down a child, and I wouldn't say pat them down, but they have to come up with something, some way to find out if they're bringing guns to school, if they're bringing knives to school, or anything like that. And that parent has centered on the central dilemma. Is any of that really possible? Can you ever keep people 100% safe in any situation, including the one we're sitting in right now?
No, you can't. But as parents are saying, as media has been reporting on, kids need to be able to expect an element of safety in the place where they learn. We had a reporter talk to a mother that lost a child in a previous shooting that goes and helps console other parents and other communities that lose members of the community to gun violence. And it's these places of worship, it's these learning institutions where kids should be safe. And Wilcox owned up to that yesterday in the press conference, and he said, we bear the responsibility. So we don't know, maybe in the upcoming months they'll go back to the drawing board and see what they use the money approved by the county for, but we're just going to have to follow.
Well, he noted that although they don't know how the student got the gun onto campus, not all bags brought into schools are actively searched by staff.
We don't actively search every bag that comes into school each and every day. I will tell you that, from one perspective, yes, we failed. Maybe we didn't intervene early enough in a bullying situation. I don't really know what took place. I don't know how a young person gets a handgun in the state of North Carolina, but we are going to look into all of those things, and we will do our best to make sure that this never happens again.
Doing one's best is all that one can do in these situations, one would imagine. But in the aftermath of Parkland, I'm told that book bags had to change. They had to be see-through book bags. Any conversation about that yesterday?
Not yet. We're still in the early stages. I mean, kids aren't at school today at Butler because they're still processing what happened. They're in the stages where it's consoling students, trying to have teachers figure out how to have the conversation when the kids come back Thursday, because tomorrow, Halloween, was already a planned teacher work day. So at this point, they're just having to have these conversations.
So parents were alerted to this shooting yesterday by a robocall, and the campus immediately went into lockdown for about 90 minutes. Because we live in a world of instant cell phone video, several students' recordings of this surfaced equally quickly.
A kid was shot. A kid was shot. They want us to go to class. Kids are crying. It's a mess.
And another video has a Butler student describing the scene.
Tons of kids running to class, and I thought they were just joking around and stuff, but once I see security guards waving their hands around and teachers saying, get in the classroom right now, lockdown immediately.
And in that situation, students are told to go to a classroom and stay quiet. Is that preferable to getting kids out of the building?
We don't know, but CMS stands by their decision to lock down, to keep students in these classrooms, to try and keep it as calm as possible, because they didn't want students running off of campus, running around. That's the conversation that all of these schools are having. What is the best active shooter drill? How do you prepare these kids for it? What do teachers have to do? I mean, that's been the topic of conversation since Parkland, since shootings before that.
At what point did faculty and staff become relatively confident that this was not an incident of a student coming in to shoot the place up? It was an altercation between two individuals and not anybody else. At what point did they know that?
So we heard from the conference yesterday that the student, Jaytwan Cuffey, turned himself in peacefully to a teacher, I think like 7 minutes after the shooting happened. And so by 7:25, and so the shooting happened around 7:15, by 7:25, they had Cuffey in custody. And so they knew pretty early on that it was an isolated incident, but they kept the school in lockdown until 9:30 to make sure.
Which caused a lot of parents to get very upset, and it was described on some network newscast as the school being essentially a flood of parents trying to break into the school to get their kids out because they didn't know who had shot whom. They didn't know if their child was all right. Was that the case? Would you say that parents just overrode the police and went to the doors of the school to try to get in en masse?
Well, at the very beginning, it was chaos. Reporters asked Wilcox and the police about that. Like, why wasn't it a streamlined process? By the time the school lifted lockdown and parents were directed to the front entrance to check out their child, they finally started getting a system down pat. But it was, as you heard from that video that the student took, kids were crying. It was chaos. Kids were trying to get out of the school. I mean, I don't know.
And of course, the school has drills. They've had these active shooter drills, I would presume already, because we've talked about this on the program with Clayton Wilcox and others, that they were going to do that this year actively, having these active shooter drills. Of course, the parents don't participate in that, do they? So
Not to my knowledge, no. It's for the students, it's for the teachers.
So the school is not in session today at Butler. It won't be in session tomorrow, as you said, because it was already a scheduled teacher workday. They're coming back Thursday, these students. Counselors have been made available should they need them for those students. But they went on with classes yesterday. They went, after the lockdown, to second period classes. Why?
Clayton Wilcox said they were trying to keep order. The first thing in their mind was making sure kids were secure, and the district and CMS thought that getting students in classroom, resuming business as normal until that lockdown was lifted, was the best way to go. And parents have been up in arms about that because, as you said, they were flooding the school trying to get their kids. But CMS still stands by that decision.
When do we anticipate hearing more from Clayton Wilcox or the administration of the school or Matthews Police, for that matter, about what happened yesterday and what's going to happen going forward?
I have not yet gotten any notifications for more press conferences, but from the attention this is getting from parents, from the media, from the school community at large, I expect in the next few days.
Okay. Jessa O'Connor, reporter for WFAE News, thank you for details. We'll have more on this, obviously, as the week progresses, and as we get more details, we'll put them on WFAE and WFAE.org. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Mike.
We move on now to the original topic of this hour, the shootings on Saturday at a synagogue in Pittsburgh that left 11 worshipers dead. How do people of faith handle hate crimes and violent acts like this one? We know there are no definitive answers to this or to much of the other violence that has permeated America as anger and tensions and divisiveness have risen. But we have asked 4 clerics to help us explore the topic. Rabbi Asher Knight is senior rabbi at Temple Bethel in Charlotte. He joins us along with Reverend Rodney Sadler, director of the Center for Social Justice and Reconciliation and the president of Mecklenburg Ministries, which is an interfaith collaboration in Charlotte. He's also associate pastor at Mount Carmel Baptist Church. And Imam John Ederer is religious director at the Muslim Community Center of Charlotte. All 3 are in our studio this morning, and with us by phone is Dr. James Howell, senior pastor of Meyers Park United Methodist Church. And you will hear nothing from these people until after the break, because that's where we are in the program. Thank you all for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Good. We'll talk to you in just a moment. It's Charlotte Talks on WFAE. Support for Charlotte Talks comes from WFAE members and Corkscrew Wine Shop and Bar, located at The View near BB&T Ballpark in Uptown Charlotte, and at Birkdale Village in Lake Norman, offering wine and beer from all over the world. Relax, uncork, unwind. ScrewCrew.com. Well, Russia apparently is up to its old tricks. This month, the government charged an ally of Vladimir Putin with buying social media and web ads to foment division and manipulate the midterm vote. Meanwhile, questions remain about Putin's relationship with Donald Trump. It's one that has baffled observers, including the Washington Post's national security correspondent, Greg Miller. He's a Pulitzer Prize winner. He's written about this extensively, and he continues to try to puzzle that relationship out. He will join us to talk about it tomorrow on this program at 9.
Hours after 11 people were killed in a Pittsburgh synagogue, President Trump held a campaign rally.
We can't let evil change our life and change our schedule.
He is changing his schedule to be in Pittsburgh today, but not everyone wants him there. I'm Ari Shapiro, reaction to the president's trip, this afternoon on All Things Considered from NPR News.
All Things Considered from 4 to 6:30 on 90.7 WFAE, Charlotte's NPR news source.
It's Charlotte Talks on listener-funded 90.7 WFAE and 90.3 WFHE. I'm Mike Collins. We're talking about the tragedy that occurred in Pittsburgh over the weekend, where 11 people were shot and killed while worshiping in a synagogue in that city. And, of course, the incident that happened earlier with African Americans in Kentucky, with a shooter going to a church, not being able to get in, and then going to a Kroger and shooting two African Americans. And, of course, the things that have happened in this country over the last several years that seem to be escalating. Let me begin, first of all, with Rabbi Asher Knight from Temple Bethel, the senior rabbi there. First of all, condolences to your community.
Thank you so much.
Jews have dealt with anti-Semitism forever. Is the incidence of overt anti-Semitism on the rise in America, in your opinion?
It absolutely is, not just in my opinion, but the Anti-Defamation League has reported that there's been a 60% increase of anti-Semitism over the last few years, and of reported incidents, right? There's lots of unreported incidents, and that's borne out here in Charlotte, too. We've seen swastikas. Our children are reporting anti-Semitic incidences at schools. We've seen it in our congregations and in communities of members who are expressing that they've experienced this. But nationally, we see it across the country, and you really see it having gone to the mainstream, to really establishment, the people in the establishment expressing anti-Semitic tropes in ways that we didn't see even a few years ago.
Do you understand this? Do you understand the root of anti-Semitism? Can you even wrap your head around it?
Well, the root of anti-Semitism, it's something that's been around for thousands of years,
yes.
Right? So the root of anti-Semitism has been around for thousands of years and is sometimes even encoded in religious principles of different religions, specifically targeting Jews. But what I would say is that it's also borne out in a way of people feeling that they don't really know Jews, and that because we're a minority religion, that people really have a tendency to be open to attack us. And it's interesting. The tropes are really fascinating. We are simultaneously weak, and we're simultaneously the puppet masters controlling everything. Yeah. Right? We are groups of people who are encouraging migrants to come to the United States, and immigrants and people seeking asylum to come to the United States, and we are people who are causing, controlling banks. And it is insidious. And we see it sort of all over the place. And so the root causes of it are it's sort of an underlying, I think it's sort of like a venereal disease that sort of sometimes stays dormant for a while. And then we see it emerge with voraciousness.
There have been attacks on mosques as well, and on Muslims in this country too, particularly after 9/11, which we'll probably talk about in greater depth later on, Imam. But do you put yourself in the same kind of situation that the Jews in America put themselves in the 21st century?
It's unfortunate. We find ourselves across the country. There's been about, I think, 6 mosques burned to the ground in the last couple of years. And obviously, it's obvious that the rhetoric coming from the campaign and then the election of Donald Trump, there were letters sent to mosques across the country saying, now that Trump is in, we're going to do to you Muslims what was done to the Holocaust in the Jewish community. And this unfortunate nationalistic, tribal attitude is a very big stain in the sickness of the history of our country, and it's something that we definitely need to address in terms of education.
There is a sickness in this country. I don't know how else to say it, because we've witnessed so many mass shootings in this country that have nothing to do with religion. They have all to do with hatred and insanity in some cases, I suppose. But this is the latest at a house of worship. As you said yesterday, Rabbi, that the kids at Butler High School don't feel safe there. Kids in schools don't feel safe anywhere anymore, it seems. Now they don't feel safe in houses of worship. This happened first and most predominantly in this area in Charleston several years ago at the Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston. There have also been shootings at mosques, at a Sikh temple in, I'm not sure where that was. 3 Muslim students were killed in 2015 in Chapel Hill. Last year, a Jewish family in Charlotte had a swastika painted on their garage door. This year, Wedgwood Church experienced vandalism again for their support of LGBTQ people. Not all of these are hate crimes. Most of them are, but not all of them were. Some were perpetrated by mentally ill individuals, but it does give rise to questions about the response, what the response of the faithful should be to incidents of senseless violence committed on those who have gathered to pray, or to acts of vandalism and harm committed simply because of a person's identity or beliefs. As the first Christian to speak here this morning, Reverend Sadler, what's your response to that?
I think the religious community has a very important role to play in this. We are, in part, those who are charged to focus on the moral values that we have as a society. We are those who are charged to remind people of the sacredness of every human being. It says in the book of Genesis, chapter 1, verses 26 and 27, that we're all created in the image of God, that we bear the, as Dr. King said, indelible mark of the Creator on our beings. We need to recognize the sacredness of every human life. And I think that we've lost sight of that. In the last few years, it appears that guns have become more important than God as things that we worship. We need to begin to reclaim the sacredness of the divine, particularly as expressed in human beings.
First thing that went through my mind yesterday when it came to Butler High School
yes.
Was the fact that this young man, a 16-year-old boy, has ruined his life.
Yes.
He's taken the life of another individual, and he's ruined his own life. When will that message sink in, that although guns seem to have become viewed as a convenient way to solve your problem, it ruins your life? When will that connection be made?
I think it will take a significant shift in the psyche of America in general. We have this twisted understanding of the Second Amendment that seems to make it a sacred act to protect guns as opposed to protecting human lives. We need a fundamental core shift in the way that we think as Americans. This manifests itself particularly in disadvantaged communities where human life has been devalued over the years. We need to begin to restore that sense of significance, value to human life.
And Dr. Howell, go ahead. I'm sorry, you want to get in there?
I think looking at the culture of violence that we have, the most common, most famous game that is now every kid is playing it is called Fortnite, where you go see how many people you can kill, and then you dance over their dead body after you have killed them. We're a country that puts $800 billion into so-called defense spending, and many of the most famous movies are about killing and murder and a lot of the music that's going on. So I really think that from the moral voice that Dr. Sadler was talking about, people of faith need to come up about the value of human life and start to produce art and encourage politics that are in the upliftment and enrichment of our country rather than investing in arms and weaponry.
I know nothing about the game Fortnite, but I can tell you that what I read yesterday about the situation at Butler High School, I think the victim was known for his ability at playing that game. Reverend Howell, let me have you chime in on this. You are the pastor of Meyers Park United Methodist Church. It's one of those churches that seems relatively untouched by most of this, and it caters to what the impression is that it caters to people who are fairly well off and don't have to worry about things like this. Are these part of the discussions of you and your congregants?
Well, yeah. I mean, we talk about this all the time. One of the great gifts is that God has given us is that if the Jewish community suffers, I suffer. Asher Knight is my friend. Christians through history have sometimes failed horribly on that friendship, but we're called to that friendship. So we have to talk all the time about how do we get to know people that are different, how do we get out of our comfort zone and know people that are different, how do we really listen, instead of assuming that one of the dumbest things is, I do get tired of, white rich people who think they understand everybody else's problems. And you don't know other people's problems until you listen to them. I always say if you only hang around with people who are like you, you'll become ignorant and arrogant. That holds for all of us. We talk about how do we get to know other people. How do we get Christianity right? What bugs me is I see people who say, oh, yeah, we're Christian, and they cheer all this evil that's going on, but they feel holy about it. So Christianity for them has become securing America's borders and tax cuts for me, and there's condemnation toward the stranger, and we forget about the poor, when actually Christianity is supposed to be humble and generous. We love our enemies. We are kind, the fruit of the Spirit. We're not triumphal, ridiculing others. But we've perverted Christianity to something else. So we've got to talk all the time about who are we? What's God actually calling us to be? How do we get it right? How do we share that with others?
You've called this a weird and dangerous phenomenon, what you just spoke about, this horrific warping of all things Christian. But the way you just described the duties of a Christian to love thy neighbor, etc., and treat others with respect, is a thread that runs through all of the religions sitting around this table.
Yeah, I think that one of the core teachings of Judaism, and I think therefore the core teachings of Christianity and Islam, is that the world as it is not as it ought to be, and that we work together to walk towards the promise and the potential of the future.
So how do you explain this rampant tribalism that puts up these false borders, not just between countries, but between people, between faiths, between left and right? How do you explain this gravitation toward this that is leading us to hatred and violence?
Well, a flaw in human nature, right, is that we're given to fear. The Bible over says, "Fear not." So that's a big problem that we have, right? So you have fear of the other, and then we pretty quickly can feel like we're victims. Frankly, we have political leadership right now that pours fuel on victimhood. You're a victim. People, oh yeah, I'm a victim. And then they begin to turn, that fear perverts itself into anger, and it comes out in all kinds of perverse ways.
Imam.
Well, when the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, received revelations, he was living in a society that was deeply ingrained in tribalism. Even different people who are clearly Arab, they had a very strong, affinity for their tribe and their people. So he came with some revolutionary statements like, none of you can be a believer until you have compassion, until you care for people. They said, but we do. He said, it's not that kind of caring that you're used to. It's going beyond your tribe. It's going beyond your people and loving them and caring for them. And that's when faith.
But within Islam, there are at least 3 or 4 and maybe more sects that don't get along. Mm-hmm. Within Judaism, there are the conservative, Orthodox, and Reform traditions of Judaism. Within Christianity, there are, I can't even count the number of denominations that stemmed from, I guess, Orthodox or Catholicism. And each of those sects, in all of these religions, views each other with a suspicious eye. Yes. What the heck is that about?
I think that we've lost sense of the core value of all of our faith traditions, i.e. that we're supposed to be one, that we're supposed to be moving towards oneness. I love the fact that you lifted up the notion, Rabbi, of the fact that we are all trying to evolve towards an ought that does not yet exist, but living in an is that we know we need to overcome. I think we're all supposed to be moving towards a greater sense of oneness. And in as much as we resist this, we seem to have periods where things seem to be getting better. The Obama years were periods where it looks like all things were possible, all people could strive and achieve all things. But then there's this backlash. People are afraid, they are resistant, and because of that, we end up back in our tribalized camps. I think that we need to begin to mediate this, look at what's going on historically, as this is part of a reaction that we saw to what looked like progress, and realize that we need to continue to press towards that greater ought.
I think
Well, I think it's the politics of power. The human ego decides to take religion and use it for its own powerful interests. So in terms of America right now, probably the two groups, or the group that is known to hate Muslims the most, is the evangelicals. And recently, Pastor Bob Roberts of Northwood Church in Texas, a beautiful mega church of evangelicals, and 20 cities across the country, he has resolved, and many other evangelical pastors have resolved. I just got back from a retreat last week where 5 imams from Charlotte and 5 evangelical pastors from Charlotte spent a week of getting to know each other and understand each other. We have different creed and dogmatic convictions, but we found that our human connection and our faith teachings as far as the priorities of moral influence on society overlap heavily, and the vast majority of who we are and what we're about as people of faith.
Well, I think it should be pointed out for people who are not necessarily people of faith that all of these faith traditions believe in one God. It is the same God, whether you call it Allah or whether you call it Adonai, or whether you call it God, or Jesus for that matter.
Or Eloah, yeah.
Yes, it's the same God.
Mm-hmm.
So why are we so hung up on the path?
I think it's important to recognize that disagreement can be the beginning of a conversation, not the end of a conversation. And sometimes we come at it with a perspective that our way is the only way, and it can be the only way.
And some faith traditions preach that.
They absolutely do.
Everybody else is going to hell because they don't go do it our way.
Right, and we have a responsibility, in not only in the faith community, but also broadly to create a culture where we can actually have conversations with people who disagree with us, who may not stand on our side on most matters, but actually can see, as Reverend Sadler said, the humanity in one another.
But is that part of anti-Semitism? The fact that you are not a Christian, you are not, you don't believe what I believe, you have not accepted Jesus Christ as your Savior, even though Jesus Christ was a Jew.
Yes, he was.
Or even worse, arguments that we killed Jesus.
Exactly. Right.
Absolutely.
Is that part of it?
Sure, but it's also a part of it where we, out of our fear, as Reverend Howell said, out of our fear, we sometimes don't recognize the humanity in another person, and we belittle them and say that they are less than we are, they are different than we are, and in fact that is a danger to us. That is something that can't be tolerated.
Well, I think it's important to note that to have conviction about your faith and your prophethood that you're following, and to believe that it is the only way and that it is God's message, does not mean that you should hate others. And so going back to this evangelical multi-faith retreat we were in, we both believe that our way and our description of the divine truth and the hereafter is correct. But we came to love each other as human beings, and we came to realize that while we're here on earth, we have these huge fundamental teachings that are overlapping about fixing society and helping society come to a repaired state of wholeness.
So Rabbi wants to say something, and I want to come to Reverend Sadler because he wants to say something here too. But the Washington Post reports that white evangelicals have the most anti-Muslim views of any American faith group. Is that based fundamentally on a lack of understanding of your faith tradition, or is it based on 9/11?
No, it is 100% first rooted in an idea about Islam that is false from the beginning. And so what we found out in this retreat, with all due respect to my fellow pastors that I respect and love dearly, we tend to know very well what it means to be an evangelical Christian. And while we differ with certain creed issues, we can appreciate that they're called to loving your neighbor and doing good for society, caring for the poor. We share those exact same values by word. So post 9/11, there was a movement of politics coming from the military-industrial complex and that white nationalistic front that unfortunately has hijacked the Christian right, because this is antithetical to Christian values. And so the idea was that Muslims, all of them, could become this terrorist, even though our scripture, if you come to know it, would tell you those terrorists are all heretics and they're all not representative of the faith.
And yet, we don't know this for a fact yet, but I would imagine that many of these acts that have been perpetrated on houses of worship, etc., are being perpetrated by Christians. Yes. These are terrorist acts.
Yeah.
These are not called, but they're not called Christian terrorists. We have to take a break. We'll come back and talk about that and many other things in the time remaining to us on Charlotte Talks. Support for Charlotte Talks comes from WFAE members at Hopeway, a nonprofit mental health treatment center for adults with residential and day programs, treating clients through integrated psychiatric care in Charlotte. More at hopewayfoundation.org. And visit Abingdon, Virginia, now celebrating the flavors of fall with craft brews, local wines, and seasonal ingredients featured at many of Abingdon's restaurants. More information and itineraries available at visitabingdonvirginia.com. Record numbers of Americans have voted early this year, and they're going to talk about the issues that have been compelling voters to turn out in such record numbers, what got them to the polls early, in fact. That's ahead in 20 minutes with Joshua Johnson and his guests on 1A. And we will continue our conversation in just a moment. Stay with us.
Hello, I'm David Borax of WFAE in Charlotte.
And I'm Jeff Tiberi of WUNC in the Triangle. We're teaming up on 2 pre-election specials this Thursday and Friday to help inform you about the midterm.
We'll discuss legislative and congressional races and the 6 proposed amendments to the North Carolina Constitution.
And we would like to hear from you. Call and tell us what you need to know about those amendments. The number, 980-224-3113.
And listen for special coverage this Thursday and Friday at 3 p.m.
It's Charlotte Talks on WFAE and WFHE. I'm Mike Collins. We're talking about religion and faith and how you respond to the increasing anger and violence in America, particularly when it is directed at members of the faith community, as it was this past Saturday in Pittsburgh. Rabbi Asher Knight is with us, the senior rabbi at Temple Bethel, Reverend Rodney Sadler, who is the associate pastor of Mount Carmel Baptist Church and the director of the Center for Social Justice and Reconciliation, Imam John Ederer, religious director of the Muslim Community Center. Did I get it wrong, Dr. Sadler? And also Dr. James Howell, the senior pastor at Meyers Methodist Church. You wanted to amplify what was just said.
You just want to amplify what Imam Ederer said. We can root for our own team while also rooting for a greater team as well. And in terms of the issue in question about people knowing us and whether or not it comes from a lack of knowledge, I think it's important to remember within the Jewish community, in the world, there are 7.5 billion people, and there are only 14 million Jews. That's it. In the United States, there's 350 million people, and there are about 5 million Jews. That's it. So the majority of people in the United States actually don't have personal relationships. And so what the establishment say, what comes across across social media and really spread in some of the darkest corners, right, really has incredible weight because there's actually no relationship with people to dispel it.
You and Reverend Howell, Dr. Sadler, are part of Mecklenburg Ministries, and one of the things, and maybe you all are, but you definitely are, and one of the things that you try to do is bring these different faith traditions together for better understanding and love and hope and all the good things in life. Are you winning in that effort, or are you losing to the dark side?
I don't know that we're losing to the dark side. I do think, and literally everyone around this table, including James, Rabbi Asher Knight, Imam John Yahya Ederer, we're all part of MECMIN. And the idea of MECMIN is we're an interfaith movement. The goal is that we want to show people that there's something common in each of our faith traditions that helps us to strive for something better as a community. We want to move from trying to find that common ground to moving towards higher ground. So I think that there is something about our faith traditions that does call us not just to isolate and to think exclusively about we are the ones who are saved, we are the ones going to heaven, but there's something about us that says, how do you see God? How can I learn from the way that you see God? How can we grow in relationship with each other? And then how do we make a better community because of that?
You just used the term interfaith movement, and I want to bring Dr. Howell into this conversation because he's sitting up in someplace on the phone and having trouble getting into the conversation. But you used the term interfaith, and a lot of people are suspicious of that. People are suspicious of words all the time now in America because actually, although some people don't admit it, words actually matter. And those who are suspicious of interfaith movements seem to be less suspicious of multi-faith movements. Dr. Howell, talk about that.
Oh, goodness. I just think about why is it the way that it is? Are we discouraged? Yeah, I get discouraged, yeah, but you have to press on because you see people suffering, people that you love suffering. One of the great joys of my life has been my friendships with the three people that are in the studio with you. Mike, if I said I'm just going to hang around with people that are like me, my life would be poorer. It's appealing in a way. If you're insecure, just hang around with people that are like you. That's like, young, immature people might do that. But as you broaden yourself, you learn more. You see the foibles in your own soul. The fear of doing that, and it gets fed by leaders. Again, leaders saying, we're superior to other people. We're in a position to judge other people if they're dangerous, and it corrodes the soul. It takes away all the joy that there could be in life. It's a kind of gleeful anger, which isn't joyful at all, is it?
So I think what you're saying is that if you hang around people like yourself, you reinforce your preconceived notions, and people who are suspicious of this term interfaith as opposed to multi-faith don't want to have their worldview shaken. They don't want to have their belief system weakened or watered down by intermingling. But with multi-faith, Dr. Sadler, you're not telling them they have to do that. You just have to say, believe what you believe. Mm-hmm. Here are people who believe what they believe. Now let's have fruit salad and get along here.
So, and I would think that the conversation here can be divided into small, little isolated zones, but the semantic range of both interfaith and multi-faith is an overlapping semantic range. We do tend to find similar things happening in both space. Multi-faith might sound easier because it doesn't suggest that there's a need to see beyond. But in part, I think with MECMIN, one of the things that we found is that I've learned so much about my own faith by being engaged with other people's faiths. I've learned a great deal about what does it mean. I was just spending some time last week with John at the Muslim Community Center, and just had a wonderful time, particularly sitting with him, teaching his young students how to speak Arabic and how to read the Quran. And I learned about this. What if we did this with a Christian community? I've learned being with Rabbi Asher Knight, watching them train their young people, watching them, sitting with them. We had a great conversation last year about prophets and prophecy. What do we see as the black church that's very similar to what we're seeing in the Jewish community as we talk about prophets?
But how do you get beyond the threat of shaking your world view?
You don't, and that's the point. You need to be able to shake your worldview. You need to be able to be disturbed. I think change comes about when we are troubled. And I think it's a good thing to trouble ourselves a little bit. It's a good thing to see that those people that we are afraid of are a whole lot more like us than they might otherwise appear to be. So it's a good thing to have a little tension from time to time. Wouldn't you say so, Asher?
Yeah. I think tension's a good thing. I think that's how we actually grow. Sometimes when we're working with young kids, it's when they actually come across something that is actually a stumbling block, that they overcome the stumbling block, and you see the confidence build. And I think that's true for adults, and that's why we encourage lifelong learning in Judaism, and I think every faith does, precisely in order to create that growth possibility.
So I grew up in Oklahoma, probably one of the most narrow-minded states in the country, and I heard derogatory terms thrown around about every minority group all throughout my childhood. But it was after traveling to Michigan, traveling to Africa, traveling to the Middle East, being an imam now for 6 years of a congregation that probably has about 30 to 40 nationalities sitting in front of me. My humanity has grown. And it's not, as you said, it's not that all of us Muslims think the same and have the exact same ideas and have the same back. Similarly, being involved in interfaith and multi-faith, I think the problem that you were alluding to is that interfaith is usually seen as a group of liberal Christians with some liberal Jews, and so they're all kind of singing in Kumbaya and the same views and preaching to the choir, whereas multi-faith is saying, hey, everybody else, whoever believes, even if you don't believe, you can come and be part of humanity and embrace the tapestry that is the world that we live in. And so I think the more you do that, the more you grow as a person, the more your value as a human being. And I really think this is something that needs to be taught in our school systems, rather than just information, which facts matter and it is very important, but just building this human bond with people, forcing the issue of building bonds with people who come from a different background so that you can learn from each other. And that's a verse from the Quran, chapter 49, verse 13.
I want to come back to this. Go ahead, Reverend Howell.
And there's even within Christianity on its own terms, it's not. I think about how do I want to age. I'm aging. Had a birthday this week, right? Do I want to become the kind of person as I age, like I've got everything figured out, I'm cocksure? I want to be the kind of person who's always curious and wants to learn more. Within Christianity, there's something about humility. You're always learning. We have a Bible study group at our church. I met with them recently. They said, we've been meeting for 15 years. We know less now than when we started. And I said, perfect. There's a humility, like we're always learning, we have more questions. That's the way this is all designed. And then that humility creates a kindness and a patience and a love for difference and others within Christianity on its own terms.
We are very quick to condemn terrorist activities, as we should be, and the Muslim community gets the brunt of that, and they have since 9/11. But as I mentioned earlier, these activities, these people coming in and shooting up churches, these people shooting guns from skyscraper hotels in Las Vegas, they're terrorists. That's what they are engaged in acts of terrorism. Some are Christian, some are not. But the Christians don't get labeled with it when they are.
Yes.
Talk about that.
I think that there's a significant problem with associating terrorism with Christianity, and we need to begin to think about the history of Christianity in America. The first terrorist groups in America were quote-unquote Christian groups, like the Ku Klux Klan, the White Citizens Counselors. We need to begin to claim that as a part of our history before we start saying that Islam is a quote-unquote terrorist faith. We need to recognize the fact that we have done things that have victimized other people because of the color of their skin, because of their ethnic heritage or their religious beliefs, and that Christian faith does not have clean hands in this regard. How does that work against the core of who we are? Frederick Douglass, in his 1845 A Narrative Life of Frederick Douglass, talks about the fact that what we see as Christianity and what expresses itself as Christianity are often two different things. Christianity should be this, as James has been talking about, humble religion that lifts us all up, but the manifestation often is far less. And because we've perverted our faith, we've enabled these quote-unquote terrorist activities to become part of it, so that we should not be surprised when we see what took place in Pittsburgh. We should not be surprised when we see an attack on a mosque, because it's unfortunately part of our tradition that we don't acknowledge. And before we can fix it, we have to begin to acknowledge it as the Christian.
We are seeing a rise in anger, hatred, fear. Not just in this country. It's not an American phenomenon. It's happening around the world. It's happening particularly in parts of Europe like France and Germany, where they ought to know better.
Brazil.
Is this a political problem in your view, or is this simply a part of the human condition?
I would say it is definitely a political problem. I mean, right now, a lot of people aren't paying attention. You can just look it up. The facts are obvious. There's videotape. There's drones. There are millions of Muslim Chinese people in concentration camps right now, and there is nothing in the media about it. I mean, and this is an atheist nation. Okay, going back to old religion and so forth.
Speaking of China now.
China being an atheist nation, communist, and they are now deciding that all Muslims are a threat again. And anyone, if anyone studied Islam, they would find out that the teachings are about compassion, mercy, taking care of the poor. If someone attacked you, obviously there are verses about what to do in response to that.
And your faith tradition, as I understand it, also is welcoming to other faith traditions.
Not just that, I mean, I really think it's important to highlight that after this horrific shooting at the synagogue, Tariq Masidi, who is he is right now the director of Muslims for Mercy, started a campaign on Launch Good and raised over $120,000 to give to the victims and preparing for families traveling there for funeral costs and whatever it may be to console and comfort them. And they've already given them $50,000 of that. And that's a fundamental core teaching, is that we are all human beings. And if one of the verses in chapter 22, verse 40, it said that God has called upon us to check all people who would stop the right of anyone to practice their faith, including those worshiping in a monastery or a synagogue or other temples of worship. It's a sacred notion that people would remember God and appreciate Him in our faith. So this is, I think, fundamental to Islam.
I think it's also where I slightly disagree, but I understand the argument. Where I slightly disagree is I do think it's playing off the political rhetoric is actually playing off something that is innate in our human condition. There was a time in ancient times where humans would gather around and cook food outside, and there'd be rustling in the leaves, and the humans that went inside the cave weren't eaten by the saber-toothed tiger, right? And fear preserves us. It protects us. And it is more comfortable sometimes to go into the cave of comfort, right, and to have that protection than to actually step out beyond yourself and to actually confront the world and the dangers that might exist. And there is, so I think that sometimes the politicians do play on that.
So as long as we're speaking about politics, we have to talk about the elephant in the room.
Please.
White House Counselor Kellyanne Conway has cited the anti-religiosity of the country, particularly of the late-night comedians, the unfunny people on TV shows, as she says. Are they in any way responsible for what happened on Saturday?
I would say that they're probably a whole lot less responsible than people who sit in big white houses and make pronouncements about who is and who is not an acceptable American.
The president has said he bears no responsibility for
I
what
don't
happened.
care what he said.
And he says that the fault lays with the media and the hate-filled fake news stories about his administration. Is the media stoking flames of hatred?
I think the people that are stoking flames of hatred are those who decide that some people are in America are worthy, others are not worthy. Some are meant to be feared, others are deemed sacrosanct.
I mean,
and in essence, I think we're getting back to a larger notion that I would say, let's bring race into this. The fact that we can alienate people because of their ethnic heritage or because of their religious views is in part a distinctly American expression of what does it mean to be racialized and white in America.
Rabbi.
The late-night comedians are drawing attention to the normalization and socialization of hate. And what we learned in the Holocaust is that hatred and bigotry aren't the worst problem. It's silence. Mm-hmm. And so it makes sense to me that there are attacks on people who are trying to elevate the problem and talk about the issues, because by doing so, they are actually drawing attention to the very thing that they don't want, that the haters do not want people to understand.
I have a minute left. The president has already said that the answer to what happened on Saturday would have been somebody with a gun in the lobby greeting the shooter. In other words, we should arm everybody, everywhere, all the time. Is that the solution, to have guns in synagogues and mosques and churches?
This is not the solution. I think we just have to be honest with ourselves. The people who lived in this country over 400 years ago, they were the natives. They had every right to fear the coming of these white people who came from Europe and genocidally wiped them out over the last 400 years. Just like the people who were forcefully taken and treated as less than human from Africa, we do not tell ourselves education is the solution for all of these problems. We need to educate ourselves about humanity, about our own history, and about our own problems so that we can address the problem of humanity.
Imam John Ederer, Religious Director of the Muslim Community Center, Reverend Rodney Sadler with Mount Carmel Baptist, and the Director of the Center for Social Justice and Reconciliation, Dr. James Howell, Senior Pastor of Myers Park Presbyterian, and Rabbi Asher Knight, Senior Rabbi at Temple Beth El. Thank you all for the hour.
Charlotte